we probably all have this one project that we started but never finished. This one almost became mine, but 2 years after printing this guy, I finally got him done and can tick him off my list. But don't get me wrong, it was not the model's fault, which was an amazing job by the Vengence Studio's Patreon. It was me who in the beginning thought I need to print everything in quarter scale without thinking about it twice. Penguin is a short but big guy at the same time, so what he's missing in height he compensates with his circumference. Let me know in the comments if you have a project that you started but never finished. If you stick till the end, I will show you my forever work in progress project. To fit this guy on my Elegoo Saturn build plate, I had to completely slice the body up and even the heads didn't fit on the build plate and needed to be cut. So I ended up with 23 prints until I had him done, with a few failures in between. And since he was one of the first models I printed, I didn't know that these prints warp quite a bit while printing or curing, and I ended up with a lot of parts that didn't really match together. But we'll have a look at that in a minute. Let's take care of the easier part first, the base. I did have a print failure with the stairs, but I always try to save it instead of reprinting because we already create enough waste with this hobby, so I measured how much has printed and then printed the remaining part. Apparently I'm not a good measurer though, so I did have some fitting and trimming to do. Then I glued everything together and covered the print lines with wood filler. Then I used cheap crafting colors and mixed a grey base coat first, and then I mixed different tones of greys and painted single stones with it. To tone the colors down, I went over it with a black wash. Then I used a gloss black rattle can and a gloss varnish for the underside of the base. For the handrails I used a metallic rattle can, and then I just wanted to use a black wash for the weathering. But the rattle can color creates such a smooth surface that the wash just dripped off. So I had to give them a quick sand and then the wash stuck to it. For that small pipe I went with my usual quick rust effect with a tile black base coat, then I went with parasite brown over that, afterwards an uneven coat of dark flesh tone, which I also used for all the bolts, and then dwarf skin sprinkles. Then I varnished it, which you can see because it's so shiny now, and dry brushed gunmetal on the corners. And to wrap it up, a black wash. Into the pipe goes this little Riddler trophy that I base coated with ivory white, then escorpena green as the main color and a wash with green olive for the sides. The very last step for the base was Green Stuff World's snow powder. For that I placed all the finished parts on the base so that I have a better image of what it would look like in the end. If you haven't seen the video for the penguins, you can check that out by clicking on the info box. I then just weathered the base a little more with a mix of charred brown and yellow olive and put a coat of gloss varnish on top so that everything looks wet and more filthy. With that I had all the parts for the base done, and we can jump over to the body, which definitely was the most post-processing work in terms of gluing and filling I had to do so far. As you can see here, I even snapped this part in the middle because it was warped so badly. Then I started gluing the one resin printed back part to the FDM printed lower part of his cloak and glued the rest of the pieces together from there. And here you can see how the parts did not fit together. For the not so large gaps I then took Aves epoxy sculpt to fill and cover them as good as possible, and for the huge height differences on the back, wood filler. Just because it's way cheaper and a bit easier to sand. With a wet cloth I tried to put some texture on the wood filler. But I could have skipped that part because of all the sanding that followed next. Because all the imperfections are so hard to see on the white color of the wood filler, I used spray filler from time to time to make them more visible. And then I spot fixed those parts with putty. And after a while the imperfections were gone, and so was all the texture of the cloak. But I had an idea that I wanted to try for that. The guys from Montana spray cans have this granite effect spray that puts little sprinkles out, and I thought I can use that to recreate texture on the cloak. And it actually worked. It might even be a little bit too textured. Here is how it looked like after I varnished it with a Montana matte varnish and then hit it with a black rattle can. Because it's really hard to hit all the crevices with a rattle can, I had to use the paintbrush for those hard to reach areas. For the shirt I used ivory, and because I was too lazy to mask off the black, I thought I will just paint the overspray black again after I'm done with the white. For the fur on his cloak I used different kinds of browns. And for his vest I mixed ivory, light brown, polished gold and silver. And for the buttons on the vest I just mixed a bit of burnt umber into the color. Then I dry brushed the fur some more with lighter brown tones and then that was done as well. Because just black for the cloak was too boring, I went in with tire black for some shading on the high spots and wrinkles. And with the slight weathering on the bottom of the cloak, the body was done, after spending about 95% of the time with bodywork and 5% on painting. For the pants, after I have glued the 4 parts together and have sanded out the seam lines, I base coated them with light grey and then painted tire black stripes on them. But the light grey was too light, so I went all over it with tire black mixed with glaze medium. The hand that is holding a wine glass was printed with clear resin and then gloss varnished. And I'm glad this wasn't my finger. For the hand holding his dinner, I started with silver as a base color, gave him a white belly and then used browns and greens for the sides and the fins. Then I painted his gloves black with Vallejo Glossy Black Primer. I also used the glossy primer as a base for his shoes and then satin varnished them to give them that shiny leathery look. For the soles and laces I used matte varnish and then weathered them with earth color. Then those were done and the last part was the ribbon, which I base coated with tire black and then used a white marker because I thought it's way easier to paint dots with that than with a brush. Unfortunately I had no grey markers, so I had to use a paintbrush anyway. As a very last step I did another touch up on the vest with a bit of more silver in the mix to make it more shiny and sealed it with a satin varnish afterwards. Now before we jump to the final reveal I promised to show you my forever in progress project. This Czech specific figure, I wanted to transform this mud trooper into a transport trooper after the Mandalorian episode came out where Mando is dressing up as one. But that was right at the time when I got into the resin printing black hole, so I might never finish that one. Like I mentioned before, let me know if you have that 1 or 2 projects that you started with great motivation but then never finished. And with that, let's have a look at the final reveal.